None of it's ever been real. You spent your whole life going around asking every halfwit you could find, if I do this, can I avoid this, or will that happen? As if you were born without the mechanism to choose. You let it all resolve itself in the absence of you. You make everyone do it for you. You think that makes you innocent?
Most horror films work in a pretty familiar way. Build tension, scare the audience, and offer a catharsis. Beau Is Afraid completely subverts that. Instead, it cultivates a gnawing, existential kind of horror. The kind you can't rationalise or shake off because it's rooted in something abstract. The horror of guilt, of parental control, of a reality that feels relentlessly cruel and indifferent to the main character. It's not the horror of what's going to happen next, but of how the world around you warps and turns against you, stripping away your sense of control and certainty. It traps you in a space where nothing feels safe and everything feels wrong, even when you can't explain why. It's been a really long time since a film made me feel so utterly weird and disorientated, while also making me laugh with its twisted, bleak sense of humour. And what makes Beau Is Afraid so fascinating is its commitment to making just enough sense. Like an actual nightmare, it follows a strange kind of internal logic. Things escalate, shift, and dissolve without explanation. Yet there's always a faint thread we can follow. Ari Aster's direction is as bold and unpredictable as the narrative itself. One of his most effective techniques is his use of wide, distance shots that often leave Beau dwarfed within the frame. Whether he's standing alone in an empty street or framed against an endless expanse of forest, the effect is always the same. Beau is small, powerless, and overwhelmed by forces far larger than himself. In dream logic, we often find ourselves trapped in vast, unrecognisable spaces, where fear feels distorted and familiar locations suddenly feel infinite or alien. And Aster taps into that exact sensation. You know you're being chased or humiliated or trapped, but you can't articulate why or even remember how you got there. Another technique is his use of static, lingering shots that hold long past the moment a conventional film would cut away. These moments create an oppressive, claustrophobic feeling of uneasy tension. We're forced to sit in Beau's anxiety with him, helpless as his world crumbles around him. And in dreams, I don't know about you, but particularly nightmares, time often behaves this way. Moments seem to stretch endlessly, and what would be a brief second in waking life feels like minutes or hours. And the camera here becomes a kind of malevolent dream observer, refusing to let us escape until it's wrung every ounce of discomfort from a scene. And then there's Aster's brilliant use of tonal shifts. The film constantly bounces from horror to absurdist comedy to heartbreaking tragedy, sometimes within the same scene. And it's disorientating, but it's also exactly how dreams work. In our subconscious, emotional logic replaces narrative logic. Something terrifying one moment can suddenly turn hilarious or deeply sad without any explanation. And Aster captures this feeling so well. Scenes escalate in ways that capture exactly how our minds process fear, guilt, and memory when we're asleep. The film literally speaks in the language of dreams. And tracking shots through impossible, shifting geography make Beau's world feel unstable and unreliable. He walks down a street that seems endless, through spaces that transform behind his back, much like how, in a dream, you'll enter your childhood home and suddenly find yourself in a stranger's house without ever realising how you got there. And Aster's control of space and geography is intentionally messy, making the viewer feel just as lost as Beau is. These filmmaking choices collectively create a world that feels neither real nor entirely unreal. It's like a liminal space, much like the space of a dream. And what's so effective about them is that they don't just depict a character's nightmare, they simulate one for the audience. We're not just observing Beau's fears, we're trapped inside them. And just like in our own dreams, the film gives us just enough coherence to keep following along, while constantly threatening to dissolve into total chaos. This is why the film feels so hypnotic and unsettling. It's tapping into a primal, irrational part of us that recognises the emotional truth of a dream, even when it defies logic. The real horror here isn't in monsters or jump scares, it's in losing control of your own reality and being forced to endure whatever twisted scenario your subconscious dreams up next. What fascinates me about Beau Is Afraid, and why I think it speaks to me so much, is that I can see it belongs to such a rare lineage of films that aren't primarily interested in conventional narrative storytelling. Instead, like certain works of Stanley Kubrick, it bypasses the rational, analytical part of your brain and aims directly to your subconscious. Much like Kubrick, Aster constructs sequences that feel less like scenes and more like experiences. They aren't necessarily there to advance a plot or deliver exposition. Instead, they're meticulously crafted to evoke moods, sensations, and abstract emotional states. 2001 famously spends long stretches in silence or in hypnotic audio-visual sequences that don't mean anything in the literal sense, but they feel like something. They provoke deep, hard to understand responses like awe, dread, confusion, or even transcendence. And Beau Is Afraid works in a strikingly similar way. What both directors understand is that cinema is a sensory art form as much as it is a narrative one. And when you strip away the expectation of a plot, you allow your audience to engage with the film in a primal, instinctual level. Both movies ask the viewers to abandon their reliance on logic and linear storytelling and instead surrender to the actual experience. It's a difficult balancing act because it means working in a cinematic language that's more symbolic, atmospheric, and abstract. It's about guiding the audience into a headspace where they can feel lost but trusting, confused but intrigued, which is essentially the logic of dreams and nightmares. These are both films about something, but they refuse to tell you directly what that is. And I just find movies like that so cool, like 2001, Mulholland Drive, The Shining, or Eraserhead. They aren't puzzles with clear answers. They're more like mirrors. They're so open-ended that whatever you bring to them, whatever anxieties or obsessions or unresolved questions you carry, the film finds a way to reflect them back at you. That's what makes these kind of films so much fun. Like, nobody walks out with the same read on what they just saw. It's about creating a kind of waking dream where you can imprint your own fears, memories, and interpretations onto the imagery. And whatever you see in it, whatever details stick out to you, says as much about you as it does about the film. And that's why these films tend to divide people, because while some viewers are drawn to that kind of ambiguity, others struggle with it. And understandably so. You can't just sit back and have all the meanings delivered to you. You have to tune yourself into the film's wavelength. And the people who love them, who truly connect with them, are often those who are willing to let go of narrative coherence and instead dive headfirst into the murky, beautiful, terrifying pool of their own subconscious. The weird, surrealist nature of Beau Is Afraid works a bit differently to the kind you might find in a Charlie Kaufman film. Kaufman's work, like Synecdoche, New York, or I'm Thinking of Ending Things, distorts reality in a similar kind of way, but it often works as a kind of metaphor, designed to be figured out and translated into more straightforward ideas about identity, mortality, or the nature of consciousness. There's a kind of literary puzzle-like quality to Kaufman's films, whereas Beau Is Afraid isn't really trying to be understood in a conventional intellectual sense. Its surrealism isn't a metaphorical language pointing to cleanly defined ideas, but more a sensory and emotional experience. Where Kaufman asks you to think your way through the absurdity, Aster wants you to feel it. Its purpose isn't to be decoded, it's to immerse you in the raw feelings of guilt, paranoia, repression, and helplessness. It's less about what those things represent, and more about what it feels like to exist inside them, not via metaphor, but by literally immersing us in Beau's head. One of the most astonishing things about Beau Is Afraid is that it even exists at all. I mean, in an industry dominated by safe bets, sequels, and franchise IP, it's a small miracle that studio like A24 gave Ari Aster such a big budget to make it. That kind of financial backing for a movie this alienating, indulgent, and defiantly uncommercial is quite rare. And this matters. It matters because if cinema is going to stay alive as an evolving, meaningful art form, filmmakers need space to fail, to take risks, to make movies that are too long, too weird, too personal, too abstract. Not every film should be engineered for mass appeal or box office dominance. Some need to be strange experiments that push the medium's boundaries, even if half the audience walks out, even if critics don't know what to do with it, even if the marketing department has no idea how to sell it. Beau Is Afraid is the kind of movie that tests what an audience will tolerate and what a film can be. And history shows that these are the films that often get dismissed in their time, but quietly go on to influence the next wave of filmmakers. Movies like Blade Runner, The Thing, Eyes Wide Shut, all kind of misunderstood or trashed upon release, only to be re-evaluated years later as groundbreaking, ahead of their time masterpieces. And part of the issue too is how these movies get presented to the public. Beau Is Afraid was marketed somewhat half-heartedly as a horror film from the director of Hereditary and Midsommar. That kind of prepared audiences for a certain kind of experience, and when the movie turned out to be a bizarre, bleakly funny, genre-defying mess, many people rejected it. But this is why it's so important for studios to continue making space for movies like this. Even when they flop, even when they frustrate people, they're quietly advancing the art form. They're expanding the cinematic language for how stories can be told and how emotions can be communicated. And every so often, one of these movies breaks through and changes the game. So while Beau Is Afraid may strike some people as just indulgent, pointless, or pretentious, it's a very important kind of film. Because for every dozen formulaic blockbusters, we need one movie that absolutely terrifies a studio executive. A movie that makes no sense on paper, can't be easily explained in a trailer, and leaves audiences arguing in the lobby afterward. Because whether you love it or hate it, or just don't know what to make of it, the experience stays with you. And in a cinematic landscape dominated more and more by safe, formulaic storytelling, that alone makes this movie worth celebrating.
I wanted to make a film where it feels like you've been through a life, or even through a person. Every detail has a detail inside of it. If you pumped a 10-year-old full of Zoloft and had him get your groceries, that's like this movie.
For me, I mean, it's my favorite of my films. And one thing I wish I said earlier on is that the film changes a lot, and it changes shape, it changes rhythm, and I think the best way to watch it is to be open to that.